Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Mondays with Mel with your host, Mel. Today, I'm going to talk about the story of Caleb. So, first and foremost, I am piggybacking off of a teaching that was given on a Sunday by our lead apostle at Greater Works Christian Church, Apostle Robert Enos. And he talked about Caleb and how God said about Caleb that he had a different spirit. And he expanded on this, and the teaching is so good, and I strongly recommend it. Today, I'm only going to draw out a few of those elements because it's relevant to what I'm going to teach today. So, definitely go and check it out. I think it'll be very encouraging and very transformative for you. So, Caleb in the Bible, he appears a few times, and he appears in the book of Numbers and also in the book of Joshua. So Caleb in the book of Joshua, well, I'm having trouble like where to start. So let me start at the end and then bring it back to the beginning. So Caleb, I think is in Joshua 14, they finally take the land, right? They take the land of Jericho, they enter in, and then Caleb is like, "Give me my mountain." He goes to Joshua and he's like, "Give me my mountain. Let me take that mountain." And then Joshua blessed him and was like, "Okay, like go ahead and take that mountain." Why is this key? For a lot of reasons. So Caleb was 85 years old. Okay, I don't know if I already mentioned that. I don't remember, but he was 85 years old. And before that, when Moses was still alive in the book of Numbers, Moses sent out 12 spies into the land in order to scout it out and to see and like to do an assessment. And so out of those 12 spies, only two of them had like a good report where they were like, yes, like we can totally do this. And the rest of the spies were like, no, we're like grasshoppers in their eyes. Like they're way too big for us. They're way too powerful for us. I'm paraphrasing. So, unfortunately, the influence of the 10 spies was too great. And so the rest of the Israelites were like, no, like we're going to die. Like we don't want to do this. And so the anger of God burned against them. And so then God proclaimed that before they're able to enter into the land, that entire generation needed to die before they're able to enter in. And so for 40 years, these people continued to wander in the wilderness before they were able to enter in. But God spared Joshua and he spared Caleb because they were the ones that were like, no, we can totally take this land. So let me tell you a little bit about both Joshua and Caleb. So Joshua, just like Eliezer that we spoke about last week, he was a huge, like, he was in service to Moses. Okay, in the Bible, it talks about how even when one of the times that Moses went up to the mountain to encounter God, Joshua was able to go with him. Like, that's a big deal. And I think it's often overlooked, the significance of that. Not only that, but it says that when Moses was in the tent of meeting and he would leave, that Joshua would stay and linger. And so Joshua also had encounters with the Lord, right? And so why is this crucial? Because once Moses died, Joshua was the one that was selected in order for him to lead the Israelites into the promised land. And so it was his service, it was his proximity to leadership and to the one that God had entrusted that ordained him to be the leader, not just by Moses, but first and foremost by God. God was the one that told Moses Joshua is going to be the one that leads them into this new phase of the journey. And so this is so key, right? Because it just demonstrates how service and servanthood and being in proximity and having God's heart first will put you in positions that you really just are not expecting. Why? Because that's what makes you trustworthy. Serving other people's vision is what makes you worthy and what makes you trustworthy, I should say, to lead others into what God has for them. Now, Caleb, as I mentioned, was one of the 12 spies, and he was a leader in his tribe, and so then, as I mentioned before, he was one of the ones that was like, yeah, like we can totally do this, right? And so, remember how I said that an entire generation needed to die, right? And how Caleb was the one that was spared. So by the time they started taking the land, as I mentioned, he was 85 years old, and they took the land, and he goes to Joshua. He's like, give me that mountain. So Caleb, in his own right, was entitled to that mountain, right? The Lord spoke these amazing things about him. And if you were to listen to the teaching that I was referring to about with Apostle Rob, then you'll see that Caleb was born not in the best of circumstances. Okay, he definitely had the ability to fall into the rest of the narrative that the Israelites fell into, right? He was labeled, he was inundated with negativity. And so it could have been easy for Caleb drugged or dragged by that same current. But remember, the Lord said that he had a different spirit. And so the thing about Caleb that I think is so profound, right? Because and the reason why I'm talking about this is because, a lot of people will come into the story of Caleb and be like, oh, I want to take my mountain. And as my friends and I were discussing this, we're like, yeah, Caleb was able to say, give me that mountain. But it's so imperative to look back and see what put Caleb in that position. And what put Caleb in that position was his ability to serve the corporate vision before he went and got his personal breakthrough. And that is so key, because a lot of people nowadays, especially, with social media ministries, with the way that everybody is able to just pick up one of these and just become a preacher in the same way that I'm doing, right? A lot of people are just able to do that without being vetted, without earning stripes, without X, Y, and Z. And it's scary. It's really scary, because it turns into this thing of entitlement, right? Where they're like, no, I'm entitled to my mountain. I'm entitled to my ministry. I'm entitled to X, Y, Z. But entitlement, there's a difference between when God ordains a reward versus when you think that you're entitled to something. If Caleb felt like he was entitled, he could have just gone up run amok and just gone on ahead. But he came to the leader, right? Which, by the way, was somebody that he served with. He was a spy along with Joshua. He served with him, and he humbled himself, and he came to this person who had now been elevated above him and was like, give me my mountain. And so now he went with the blessing of Joshua, which, in my opinion, he also went with the blessing of the Lord. And so why am I saying this? I'm saying this because there's so many rogue people out in the body of Christ, and it's really scary. It is literally the scariest thing ever, how people are so rogue in their willingness to just start preaching and start teaching and start ministering without planting themselves in a house. But not just planting themselves, like going every Sunday, going every Bible study, going to the functions, but I mean, like, really sowing in and really like stretching yourself and really like sowing where you're fed. And that is one of the things that I think is so imperative, especially, in the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation, is being able to go and sit and serve without expecting anything to come out of it. And God is so gracious, because something always comes out of it, whether it be freedom to your generations, whether it be business, whether it be ministry, whether it be success. Like, it looks different for everybody, but it always, like, the principle is still the same. And the principle is serving. The principle is being committed. The principle is helping the corporate breakthrough, and then going for your individual breakthrough, still with the blessing of the leader that God has placed over you. And so with that, I just really want to encourage you, like, let's do a self-assessment, like, am I, and I'm throwing myself, there's a reason why I'm speaking about this. It's because God is dealing with me in this area, right? Because I think we all get so busy in the promises that God has given us without realizing that our promises are tied into the corporate body. The promises are tied into what God is doing globally, what God is doing nationally, regionally, and of course in your home. Like, there's just like, for example, if you're like, for example, if you're like a new believer and you just started going to church, like, I totally get that. But I've seen this natural progression in people that are like genuinely saved. And I know I can't really be a witness of that, right? I can, as far as like, I can't judge people's motives. That's only for the Lord, but I can judge by the fruit. The word says to judge by fruit. And so, in judging fruit, I've noticed that when people are 100% genuine, that the natural progression of things is that they want to start serving, right? And so then they become saved, and like a few weeks later, they start sowing, they start serving, they start getting involved in any which way they can possibly do it in the place that they're being planted. And so I just want to leave you guys with that. I know that it's definitely a little bit challenging, a little bit sobering. And so I hope you guys get something out of this. If you do, or if you don't, make sure you leave us some sort of feedback, some sort of comment. And of course, we love to engage with you guys on that. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and we'll get back to you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you again next Monday. Bye.